1, to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got some very important information to share with you. Hopefully it will be of great interest to all on the call. As a reminder, this call is for our transit systems and is not provided for the press. Anyone who is unable to attend this meeting, the slides will be prepared after the call and posted on the website, as well as a recording of this presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to give you, as always, an update on the CARES Act implementation. We've got some information on ROPE, some information on the fiscal year 22 application process, a little update on funding from DHHS, a reminder about the NC Transit Cares webinar that will be next week, an additional webinar that hopefully you have heard about earlier this week about the electric transit and school buses, and then we'll wrap up with any questions. As far as the CARES Act update, we've got 3 things that I just want to touch on. The first 2 are just updates on system application status and claims. The beef of the discussion will be actually in the second CARES Act application. At this point, we have all 78 applications have been submitted for the 5311 CARES Act, and then we have 64 agreements in place. And I just want to give another shout out all to the fiscal staff and all the people that have been supporting getting those contracts out as quickly as possible. Because obviously until agreements are in place, you guys cannot submit claims. So I really appreciate all the hard work that my staff has been working through to get those in place as quickly as possible. To date, we have had 18 claims submitted. 3 of those have been paid out. This totals a request of $1.5 million in reimbursements. So let's go ahead and switch gears to the second CARES Act application. I know this has really been on everyone's mind with respect to, you know, how are we going to disperse the second funding and when is that going to occur? So during the second CARES Act application, there are several things that we need to apply for. The first one is for the 5307 subrecipients, we need to request that money to be drawn down. We need to include the money for the Appalachian areas, the intercity bus, and then finally, which is of most concern to the bulk of the people on the call, additional funding for the 5311 transit systems. I'm going to go ahead and delve a little bit deeper into the additional funding level to talk about what we have done. So for the second distribution of CARES Act funding, we are going to request from FTA $27.5 million, which is going to include that $1.25 million in Appalachian funding. This is funding for the 53 eligible community transit systems, and the amounts are basically based on what you would normally get from federal and state funding for operations. Specifically, it's going to be the sum of what you would have received in ROPE, assuming a typical year appropriation of $18.6 million. Your fiscal year 20 SMAP amounts if you are a system that receives both ROPE and SMAP, and then your fiscal year 21 application totals for 5310, 5311 operating, rural, state operating, and concept. I just want to remind you that even though the allocation methods or allocation procedure is based on all of those funds, it's still, we haven't changed the rules about CARES Act funding. It still can only be used for 5311 eligible activities, and only public transportation that is open to the general public is eligible under 5311. 5310 and rope trips which are not open to the general public are not eligible. And I know this has been a question on several of the last week's calls. If your 5310 trips are open or are basically operated the same way, anyone can go on those trips, then there really is not a distinction between 5310 and 5311, as long as it is open to the general public. So anybody can secure those demand response trips, regardless of whether they're elderly or disabled, then it would be CARES Act eligible. So, I think there's been a lot of discussion about, breaking out those trips, how to do it. If you can say it's 5311 general public, then that trip, regardless of whether you had normally charged it under 5310 or not, would be CARES Act eligible. So just to give you another, with the working group, we're still discussing future disbursements. And before I move on to this slide, let me just also add that for the second disbursement for the 5311 operating cost, it's not going to require an additional application by you guys. It's just going to require a change request. So that should be a little bit faster to be able to get the money to your systems more quickly, requiring less administrative work on the back end. We will be providing those totals to you once we have that application for the increased funding approved by FTA. So moving on now to the third disbursement, it's going to be based on need, as we had indicated before. We will most likely be asking for more frequent OpStat data for the first part of the year at the least. Fiscal research is asking for additional data to determine, what needs there actually are by the systems. We're going to need to have that information to determine what the impacts, are long-standing for COVID. So, bear with us. We do realize this is an additional data request, more frequent than what we normally would ask you to do. But this data is I can't even speak enough about how important it is to get good data to help support the need, both for our own purposes in allocating this third disbursement, but also in justifying to the legislature and others what the true impacts of CARES Act funding and the loss of SMAP and ROPE are. So again, there'll be other survey requests that are related to revenue, expenses, and needs may be needed to supplement OpStats data. I also want to thank all of you guys who have responded to the request from Camille and NCPTA on receiving data. We're trying to work together as much as possible to not duplicate requests, but again, bear with us because we need this data and it's very important. I will turn it over briefly to David Rue if you would like to have some words.
Heather, can you hear me?
I can.
I just want to take a minute to thank Heather and Ryan for their efforts over the last 10 days. Also want to thank Camille Sterling, Kim Angel, Tawana Williams, Scott Ryan, and Brian Litchfield. Since our last statewide system member call on July the 1st, the work team has met with Ryan and Heather on July the 7th, the day after H77 became law. We followed that with two internal calls with our work group, both over the holiday, July 4th holiday. So we met on the 7th, we met again on the 13th for a couple of hours. And so our intent is to do a couple of things. One, make certain that that application gets to FTA in a timely way. So there was some urgency around us coming together. And then secondly, we've certainly heard from our systems about giving some financial guidance relative to the loss of ROPE and SMAP. So this is our attempt with this second chunk of CARES Act to respond to what has happened in the legislature with the loss of ROPE and SMAP. And we're continuing to have conversations relative to the remaining shortfall, particularly in SMAP. And we'll continue to be working from an advocacy point of view going forward. But I appreciate the collective effort. We got some great experienced transit leaders working on your behalf, and I'm grateful for their leadership and their service. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, David. And again, the need for data is, very important. And, what David was saying about trying to, get this application into FTA as quickly as possible. We want to make sure there's as little delay as possible in getting funding out to you. So, this is the methodology that we have elected to use for the second disbursement. But we really need to get a better handle on, the needs of the systems to make sure that disbursement of CARES Act funding makes whole as much as possible all of our transit systems within North Carolina. So, road report, you should have received an email from Carolyn about some issues we were having with the road report. There were errors found in the report. They are being corrected. My understanding is that they should be done by, I think, today, and sent out as soon as they are corrected. It will be sent out to all road recipients. And because of this, these errors being found, we have extended the deadline to the end of the month. So rather than being due today, the road reports will not be due until the end of July 31st. Also, for fiscal year 2022, the application call for projects, and all of the funds are listed there on the left, 5310, 5311, combined capital, et cetera. Those applications will be posted August 24th. This is a slight delay in what our normal schedule would be. It's just giving us additional time to work through the CARES Act and other needs of the department to process. They will be due November 27th. We will have webinars to help with the application process. It will either be August 19th or the 20th, and also again on the 27th. So please watch out from an email from Carolyn about those training dates and the application being posted at the end of, towards the end of next month. For some of you guys, you should have received an email requesting a meeting with DHHS with respect to their CARES Act funding. They have earmarked approximately $5 million to be given to Tier 1 rural counties. If you are in that category, you should have received an email from us trying to schedule a time to discuss the implications of this funding and how these funds are going to be dispersed. So, please, if you did not respond to the smart sheet that Blair sent out, the date is next Thursday at 1 p.m. We hope that you're able to attend or send somebody else, because it's very crucial that we discuss this funding, because my understanding is their time frame for spending down their money is actually much tighter than ours is. So we're trying to work with them as much as possible to get their funding sent out. I'm not 100% sure what the limitations are, with their funding. So again, we're just trying to work as a facilitator between you, the transit systems that are eligible for this funding, and DHHS.
And Heather, this is, from our vantage point, very important to demonstrate we're looking at a lot of different ways to fund the needs. This helps with our conversations with our legislators, particularly in those 31 Tier 1 counties. So thanks for the effort on that.
Yep. Thank you, David. This is just a reminder that the NZ Transit Cares webinar is this Wednesday, coming Wednesday, July 22nd from 10:30 to 1 p.m. I've heard that there's a lot of people that have registered, so please, you still have plenty of time to register. There should be some good information sharing, and we hope that the tools that we're using to hold this virtual meeting will be very engaging. Again, we had hoped to have this in person, but COVID being COVID, this is the next best thing. So, please try to join us from 10:30 to 1 p.m. on next Wednesday. And then to make it like a full, beyond webinar day, the Plug-in NC is also hosting the first of a three-part series to learn more about electric transit and school bus deployments in the Southeast. So if you have opportunity, this is going to also be on Wednesday, directly following NC Transit Cares. And Jay Perkins of Greensboro Transit Authority is actually going to be talking about their deployment of electric transit fleets. So this is, electrification of transit is something that is, very important right now in North Carolina to help support Governor Cooper's excuse me, Executive Order 80 towards electrification of vehicles on North Carolina's roads. So if you have the opportunity, please try to join us for that webinar as well. And that wraps up the information. I realize there was a lot that I shared with you today. Obviously, it's of great importance with respect to, that second distribution of funding. Again, we hope to get that application into FTA by the end of this week, early next week, so that it can process it in time for the federal shutdown, so that it's actually in place and we can not have any delay in processing. So I will turn it over to Blair to see if there's any questions. I see that there's one question. Can you email these slides to us? Bob, they are posted on the website, and they can be downloaded as soon as the webinar is over with. Excuse me. So the first question is so our fiscal year 21 rope allocation request will be dispersed through CARES Act second round funding. The amount that you would, if you're a 5311 system, the amount that you would have gotten for fiscal year 21 will be allocated through CARES Act. I just want to caution you that these are numbers that we were used to come up with the total for each system allocation. It's still the same. I don't want to use the word rope because it's not rope money. It's not state funding. It cannot be used to match other federal funds. It cannot be used for non-5311 eligible activities. So we took that number to apply to each system to determine how much to get in that second allocation. So I don't know if that answers the question quite. I just want to make sure that it's very clear that these are the numbers that we were used to come up with a total allocation for each system, but all of this funding is CARES Act funding. It's held to the same limitations for CARES Act. Okay, will you clarify in the slide that CARES Act funding can only be used for 5311 eligible activities, and be specific that the second application is only eligible for NCDOT designated section 5311 CT grant systems? The comment related to eligibility is not 100% correct. Some systems may not be receiving section 5311 CARES Act based on NCDOT management procedures not related to eligibility of FTA regulations for utilizing CARES Act funding for rural services. So during this second round, again, this is with the typical 5311 CT grant recipients, the ones who received funding in the initial round. Any non-traditional partners, and this is going to delve into ones that are not part of the NCDOT grant management procedure or plan, those would be handled case by case in the third round of funding, if funding is available. Again, what is a 5311 eligible activity? It's those same things that were eligible previously. It's operations, it's admin. So we're not breaking it out into both admin and operations, or we're not separating it out. It's all under operations, but it's still going to cover both admin and operational costs for those 5311 CT systems. We had applied last fall for fiscal year 21 for both administrative and capital replacement vehicles through the annual CTP grant process. Are those funds still coming outside of the CARES Act funds, or will the second allocation of CARES funds just discussed be allocated for those particular purposes? Okay, so this kind of goes back to what I said for the first question. The funding that you're receiving under this allocation method is not to take away from any other grants that you can apply for. It is just the methodology that we are using to determine the allocation levels for each of the CT systems. So if you applied for funding last year, we still plan to apply for all of our normal FTA grants that we normally would apply for. This is just additional, this is just how we're allocating the CARES Act funding. Tammy, did you want to add anything additional to that question, or?
No, I mean, I would just say that, yeah, the FY21 grants that you applied for are still going out. They're just held up a little bit because of us working on the CARES funds going out first.
And that kind of goes with the next question. When can we expect fiscal year 21 agreements, particularly capital? So we're working through those. I mean, obviously, a lot of our priorities have shifted to trying to get the CARES Act money, in place. But all of our normal operations are continuing. Please confirm final year-end ROPE report and OPSTAT report due dates. Well, now the year-end report would not be due until the end of July. OPSTAT, I believe, is the same time.
Heather, this is Carolyn.
Yep.
On the calendar, the OPSTAT annual report is due on August 31st.
Okay. Thank you. Can you give us an update on the 5307 CARES Act applications? Where are we on agreements? Application was submitted on April 30th.
I can
Tammy?
answer that. The 5307 application. I'm sorry, yes. The 5307 applications are done differently from the 5311. We cannot apply for those until y'all actually fill out the applications in EBS because they're more specific. I'm working on that grant application with FTA right now. So my goal is to try to get that in before the end of this week. And hopefully they will turn it around just as quickly as they did the 5311 CARES money.
Okay. To be clear, EdTap subrecipients cannot be allocated monies for educational medical meals at congregate centers since they are subscriptions. Tammy, that would be a question for you.
And to be honest, I do not have an answer for that. I would have to look that up.
Heather, this is Carolyn.
Uh-huh.
In the ROPE guidance, Appendix A, there's a table of eligible activities by program. So whoever put that question in, refer to that and look at these activities and see if they're listed as eligible or not. So that should be able to help them.
Okay. So we will capture that and add that link to the guidance in the summary of that question. We'll be notified of how much CARES Act funding we will be getting in the second allocation in order to do a change. Yes, we will. We have that table generated. We just don't want to necessarily, I mean, nothing can be done until we get approval from FTA. So yes, we've got that table and it will be provided to all CT systems once we have that approval. The second CARES Act funds can be used for operating even if the system is not a regionalized system, correct? Again, the second CARES Act is for the 5311 CT systems. So it's if you received funding from us or through us in the first round of CARES Act funding, then you will be receiving additional funding in the second round. Was there a reduction in vehicle replacements because of the shortfall of money? I had a vehicle that was over the 100,000 mile mark, but it was not in my agreement that I received yesterday. This is a specific question, so if you could just, ask your MDS, we can determine what was going on about that. If issues were found on period 2 of the report, were there any issues with period 1, and will we need to resubmit? Carolyn, did you want to touch on that?
Since the form is the same, I would imagine the calculation errors we found would be there. One thing, since no money was distributed in period 1, I don't know if that makes a big difference, but when I get the form back, I'll send it out and Heather, perhaps you and I can have a conversation of whether we need to send out period 1. But right now, I don't think that would need to be done.
Okay. And this one is just a reminder to us to give you guys more forewarning when we put grants out with deadlines, because you have obviously limitations in being able to get grants on your agendas. So we will make a better effort to try to coordinate that with our systems. If we are a 5311 recipient and use third-party contractor for rope recipient rides, can we get funding from CARES Act funding to continue ridership for EdTap and RGP? My understanding is that contracting services is still CARES Act eligible as long as it is 5311 eligible activities. Did you want to add anything to that, Tammy, to clarify?
No, you covered it. Thanks.
Okay. For fiscal year 21 CTP grants, there is a state match included, supplementing the local match to leverage the federal funds. The recent state DOT budget cut eliminate the state match for fiscal year federal grant. Will the local match need to increase as a result, or can we plan for the local match at the same level as was identified in the CTP application from last fall? Unless Tammy has a quick answer for that, we're going to probably have to look that up a little bit. I mean, we did receive, some funding to match grants. I will be truthful in letting you guys all know that we are still working through the implications of the cuts to SMAP and ROPE in our own budgets and how that's going to work. As David kind of alluded to previously, we are looking at every methodology that we have to help, offset the impacts to the cuts to SMAP and ROPE. So unless you have something quickly to answer to that, Tammy, we may just defer that one until later.
I think we can safely say that the majority of the FY21 grants were processed prior to COVID really affecting North Carolina, and they were approved for the Board of Transportation. So they are included in amounts that we have set up for our budget plan. So unless something changes, there should be no change in the in those amounts that were approved.
Okay. I think this is clarification on one of the other questions. Can ROPE EdTap subrecipients be allocated CARES funding. Um, all of the funding at this point, and again, you may need to talk to us offline, see if I can answer this a little bit better, but all funding through CARES Act is going to, that we are administering through NCDOT, is going through the transit systems. So we're not going to provide funding to subrecipients outside of the transit systems, for round one or round two. If it is an eligible 5311 activity, the transit system can then, you know, provide money or what have you to a contract service as long as it's 5311 eligible. So if that's not answering the question, just please touch base with your MDS or me directly, and we'll try to answer the question more correctly or more completely. Next question. If we have already submitted our period 2 ROPE report, will we have to resubmit it with a revised form? Carolyn, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, if there may be some counties, some transit systems that didn't have a problem with their report, didn't make transfers, your unexpended funds carried over appropriately. If that's the case, then I wouldn't see a need to resubmit another form. However, if you see an error, if something looks odd that you made a transfer, it didn't show up, or you don't have unexpended funds showing up, then you would want to submit a new form. But if everything looked fine, and we can look it over and talk about it, but if everything was fine or you've expended all your funds, then I don't think a new form needs to be submitted.
Okay, that's the last question right now in the chat box. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to submit a question if they have any. The question is, will our MDS be able to let us know that our ROPE report is okay? And then there was a question, I guess, before that. So these all look like they're for you, Carolyn. I'm glad you're on the call. Can you reiterate which programs within ROPE that you can transfer between?
Okay, can I answer all of them as a group answer?
Yes, you can.
Okay. NDSs can take a look. I've had a lot of contact with some of them about, hey, can you help me out? We also have support from ITRI. So if it's something we can't figure out, I do have Jeremy to lean on. However, I don't want him to be the first stop, because I think we can determine a lot on our own. And transfers can happen. EdTap funding has to stay with the EdTap program. Employment and RGP funding can be transferred to any of the programs. So those two offer you the flexibility. That answer, I can't see the questions, but were
yeah,
those
that does.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically, EdTap cannot be transferred, but RGP and employment can be transferred either between each other or to EdTap. So
correct. And MDSs and myself, we can take a look at your report forms.
okay, yep, that's it. Okay, we'll give everyone just one more minute. All right, there was a question, will the second CARES Act have a local match? All CARES Act funding is 100% federal, so there is no required local match. Okay, I am not seeing any additional questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up the call for today. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. There's something about rides on election day. Okay, a question regarding voting has come up among our county commissioners requesting we provide free rides on election day. So I guess the question would be whether this loss of revenue would be CARES Act eligible. I don't know. We'll have to follow up with that outside. Next question is, will systems get their CARES Act 2 allocations after the grant is submitted or once approved by FTA? Our thought was that we would provide those numbers to you, once it is approved by FTA. If there is a need for you to know what those values are prior to approval for budgeting purposes, let us know and we can reevaluate that need and submit it. I mean, I don't think those numbers are going to change. Just keep in mind that they're not going to be available to draw down until the change requests are fully approved. Will any CARES Act funding be available for capital purchases, specifically expansion vehicles? Our hope was, again, that third round of funding would be available for capital investments. A lot of it really depends on, obviously that was also prior to, SMAP and ROPE being zeroed out. Our hope was to have funding available, but our priority is to make sure that that our systems are able to operate, as needed during this crisis. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Obviously, as if we get any information about the FTA approval of our next application to them, in between scheduled meeting times, we will send out a note to all systems to let you know. Is there a list of Tier 1 counties? Yes, there is. And if you're referring to the DHHS systems, it's actually Tier 1 rural, which is slightly different than the Tier 1 counties in general in North Carolina. Again, if you've got a question about that, you just give me an email and I can provide you that information. All of the systems that were in that Tier 1 eligibility have been contacted or should have been contacted at this point. Okay, so again, we will be providing information to you about the FTA grant. If you do need to have this information prior, with respect to the amount that you'll be receiving prior to approval by FTA, please let us know and we can reevaluate submitting that information to all systems beforehand. So if there's nothing else, then I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a great remainder of the week. Have a good day.